Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Ian Watkinson, and I'm a National Executive Member and also Chair of our National Health and Safety Forum, Organising Forum, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our second session today as part of Health and Safety Month, Asbestos, Death, Denial and Concealment. So with that, I'd like to welcome and pass you over to our excellent speaker today. For those of you that don't know, Hank Roberts, a fellow National Executive Member, has been a leading figure. In fact, I'd go as far to say a champion with campaigns and action on asbestos in schools and school and college health and safety in general. And it's been my pleasure to work alongside him on many occasions. So good afternoon and over to Hank.
Yeah, hi. As said, I am Hank Roberts. You can hear me croaking a bit. That's because I've just come down with COVID. It's not going to stop me. And if I get completely unintelligible, Jean, my wife, is going to carry on the conversation because one bit's quite a lot of talking. Okay, so let's have the next slide, please. Right, the book on the left was written in 1979. It catalogued all the dangers of asbestos and innumerable scandals that had already occurred regarding it. It was my go-to book when I was fighting in the 1980s over asbestos, and it still is today. The book on the right is an account of my life, including a section on asbestos. It is about how to fight the liars that have peddled and knowingly sold a deadly substance for profit, or have knowingly concealed its presence, or its removal, or its dangerous state. Its condition in buildings where it is used inevitably worsens and decays over time. Why on earth conceal its removal? The danger has gone, and they have overseen its removal. You would think they would want to shout it from the rooftops. But no. Why? Because if it was there in the first place, some questions arise. Did people know about it? What state was it in? Might staff or worse, pupils have been contaminated? Whose responsibility would that be? Why do I say or worse, pupils? The reason is that mesothelioma, a type of deadly cancer caused by invisible asbestos fibers, or even a single fiber being breathed into and lodged in the lung, can kill. The reason the young are especially at risk is that mesothelioma has an especially long latency period, i.e. once a fiber is lodged in the lung, it would normally take 30 to 40 years before it invokes the disease. It is a painful and horrifying disease, invariably fatal. It's an incurable cancer. Asbestos is not an isolated problem. Innumerable deadly substances have been promoted and sold by capitalists who didn't give a damn about who died so long as they made money. Smoking was a prime example. There are many others. Next slide. These are just some of the things that have been said to be safe and sold, and then of course they've been found out to be deadly. So there's a long history of this being done in terms of hazardous substances. Next slide. It was known by the manufacturers that their cigarettes caused cancer. Over 100 million died in the 20th century and even more now. And the fact is they knew about it and they covered it up and they spent billions on it to carry on making a profit despite its danger. Next slide. My father started smoking as a child and died of lung cancer at the age of 30, the fate of literally millions across the world. The tobacco companies like Philip Morris are still at it. Next slide, please. This is a t-shirt and a very fancy book, okay, sent to a mate of mine who works in a shop. So they're still promoting smoking and more cigarettes. Obviously, they send them to schools, they send them free. And if you look at that, it says smoking since 1879. Well, that's like sort of, a posh restaurant saying you've been open for so long, it's meant to be a good thing, but it's not a good thing, obviously. However, tobacco's cover-up is not nearly as long as asbestos is. Next slide. Okay, who's that? Yes, it's Pliny the Elder, and he is a person who was witnessing the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, AD 79. He died actually in it, but he wrote about people dying in the asbestos mines then from the asbestos fibers. So they've known about it since Roman times, that asbestos was not just dangerous, but a killer. I first got involved with asbestos, understanding its dangers and the lengths those in authority would go to cover it up 36 years ago, when I was a young teacher at Slaybrook High School in Brent. I became the school NUT rep in my first term, and shortly after, health and safety rep, as this gave you additional powers. Next slide, please. What happened is chronicled by no less than 6 investigative reports I completed with some assistance as Slaybrook's health and safety rep. They particularly cover secrecy, negligence, and cover-up. They make the point that absolute, unabated persistence is necessary to deal with these important issues. Recounting the story will take quite some time, but I think you will find it interesting and instructive. What follows are extracts from my book covering the reports, interspersed with explanations of how we got the information. And if my voice gives up or you can't hear me, then Jean, my wife, will carry on and read it. The first document, Asbestos, the secret removal of asbestos, including blue asbestos from Slaybrook School site and the attempted authority cover-up. Suddenly, when the heating was turned on for the first time this term, smoke was seen in the bottom corridors. The fire brigade was called. 2 fire engines arrived. They discovered that the smoke was coming from the paint on a boiler in the boiler house. The caretaker then informed staff that the boiler had been painted after asbestos had been removed during the summer. A visit was made to the borough's health and safety office to inspect the central asbestos register. It showed that on 2 occasions, suspected asbestos was discovered, samples taken, samples analysed, asbestos confirmed and asbestos removed, all in total secrecy from the health and safety rep, all the staff and the governors. The boiler, insulated with blue asbestos in an extremely friable and dangerous condition, blue asbestos is the most dangerous, by the way, was allowed to continue to ventilate into the school playground, which meant that fibres were breathed in by pupils playing in the playground. The then head teacher, Sandy Davis, lied about his knowledge of events. The authority backed his deceit, or indeed instructed it in the first place. They refused to answer questions, though they had a legal obligation to do so. As a stop press, we revealed that a 3rd secret asbestos removal had taken place. This creates asbestos 2. Pupils at risk. The authority cover-up continues. Nothing happened, so we produced asbestos 3. Asbestos scandal at Slaybrook. The inquiry into the authority cover-up. Spacemen at Slaybrook. Asbestos removal during school time while children were on the premises. Eyewitness accounts. All very dramatic. We cover a meeting of Brent Council's Education Committee where under an item we called the removal of asbestos from Slaybrook High School, it was resolved to have 1, full investigation into what happened, 2, all children and staff placed on an asbestos register, 3, a survey of all Brent educational establishments, 4, a trust fund set up with children and members of staff at the school that they might use when affected with ill health problems from asbestos over the next 30 to 40 years. One Brent councillor confidentially says that they believe the Brent asbestos executive would never meet, or if they did, they would avoid any real questions. They said too many important people were involved in the cover-up. Further, removal of asbestos is such an expensive business, it cannot be allowed to be brought into the Brent public's attention as an open revealed scandal. There was no meeting, though the Education Committee, which had seen the evidence, felt that there should be an inquiry. Later, however, a date was finally set. The rest of the document contains a series of massively awkward questions and direct evidence of cover-ups. We handed these out at a full council meeting and watched the proceedings from the gallery. I could still remember the Director of Education, Adrian Parsons, reading it in the meeting with deep concern. The allegations were, of course, all true. If they hadn't been, myself and Robin, a stalwart colleague of mine, not only would we have been sacked, but no doubt done for libel as well. Saga continued. By fortuitous accident, I noticed not just some external evidence of asbestos work having been done in a boiler house, but the door of the boiler house was unlocked. There were no iPhones in those days to take photos. Robin lived near the school and he shot off home to get his camera. Putting my job on the line, I entered the boiler house to take photos. If I'd got caught, certainly I would have been summarily dismissed on the spot. The Chinese saying goes, courage is not the absence of fear. I was scared shitless. It's the ability to gain the strength to try and conquer them. The result was the production of Asbestos 4, Cause for Concern. The photographs contained on page 1 and 2. The best bit is the quality of allegation on the front cover. I've never lost my compulsion to explain everything in long, dramatic headlines. The stop press at the end of Asbestos 4 is that myself and Robin were facing dismissal hearings after complaints from the head teacher, me of blackmail, and Robin of refusing to reply when spoken to. You couldn't make it up, could you? We first heard about my alleged blackmail. The first we heard of it was with the head teacher reading the asbestos cover-up and having a letter from the Director of Education read out to us. They wouldn't give us a copy. Robin and myself were told that we needed to collect the letter, so we went to the office of the Deputy Director of Education, Gordon Mott. Mott came out into the corridor with the letter. Robin asked to see it and read it. When he had, he accused Mott. "You've changed the letter. This isn't the one read out to us previously." Mott tried to take the letter back, but Robin held on to it. They physically tussled in the corridor and eventually it ripped in half. You can't have a virtual fight with a Deputy Director of Education and get away with it. Robin very soon received his letter of suspension. During his suspension, by the way, we made a mannequin of Robin, which appeared every day sitting in his chair in the staff room. Up yours. The disciplinary hearing before the governing body was set. I was Robin's representative. How could anything but a guilty verdict be found? Mott gave his evidence recounting how Robin had fought with him. True. But he also added a choice selection of swear words that Robin had abused him with. Untrue. I questioned him carefully and repeatedly over whether there could have been any doubt whatsoever about the words Robin uttered. There was no doubt. He had written them down straight away. Fortuitously, suspiciously fortuitously, a witness was found. A secretary just happened to be working in her office and had the door open into the corridor. She was a witness. I questioned her relentlessly about any distraction or noise or open window with traffic noise, a fan or another person in the office talking to them, or radio, any telephone interruptions, etc. As I went on and her repeatedly stating ever more forcefully that she had heard everything absolutely clearly, they became increasingly angry. Finally, I say, that's very interesting. Your evidence is that there was and could be no doubt whatsoever about the words said. And then I produced, with a theatrical flourish, a small pocket tape recorder and announced that I had taped the whole incident. There was no swearing whatsoever. Your evidence is false. Robin acquitted, Education Office humiliated. How could I have had the prescience to take a pocket tape recorder when we were simply going to collect a letter? The answer is paranoia. Just because you are paranoid, it doesn't mean that they aren't out to get you. Remember that. But we didn't stop there. We were relentless. something which has remained with me throughout all our campaigns. Asbestos 5 was produced. The cover-up continues. Head teacher's blackmail allegation unanimously rejected by governors. Asbestos at Slaybrook, failure to test or tender for Boiler House C. The grossness of incompetence or corruptions. That tendering and whatever you think is the key in corruption in asbestos. Getting it done without tenders enables them to make extra profits. As one might expect, there was never any local authority investigation or formal report. A lid was put on it when the head teacher, Sandy Davis, adroitly exited. An astonishing sequel was that the next head, Colin Ravden, engaged in precisely the same covering up over asbestos work at the school in 1987. And yes, you guessed it, we produced Asbestos 6. The headlines were as forceful as ever. The lesson of all this, determination and persistence is all. Scroll forward to 2008, a second case study, a special school named Hay Lane, and to a special union rep named Jenny Cooper, and a unique man named Michael Leese. Michael had been an RAF pilot, and his wife Gina, a primary school teacher. Next slide. Gina developed mesothelioma from exposure at her school and died. He decided to investigate how and why this had happened and to do his utmost to stop it happening to others. He set about mastering his brief and becoming both a leading campaigner in the country, fighting to achieve the removal of asbestos from all schools, and the leading expert in the country on the subject. Anyhow, Michael had an interest, had ITN News interested in the subject of asbestos in schools, and particularly was concerned with class-type schools, a type of system-built school that contained a large amount of asbestos. Jenny Cooper worked in such a school, Hay Lane. The head was persuaded to let the TV film team into the school with asbestos contracting experts to appraise the size and nature of the problem. What was the answer to that? The problem was huge. After the LA found out, they went mad. Just have a quick drink, sorry. With the problem exposed, what to do? The authority wanted staff and kids to go back into the school and just carry on. They would consider the situation and decide what to do. What came next indicates the power of using a matter of health and safety to take direct action. Myself, Jenny, and Jill addressed the staff outside the school at the start of the day following the TV program. We would not go in unless there was a written agreement about what was urgently going to be done. We all marched off to a big cafe at a local shopping complex nearby. Staff stayed there having teas, coffees, etc. at the union's expense whilst we negotiated. Voila, a deal was reached. This took some courage on the part of the staff who were worried about what the local authority would do. But courage, as I've said, is not the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome it. Next slide. Sorry. A brilliant headline, that, killer in the school. Later, the school was demolished and a new state-of-the-art school building built, costing £30 million. Later still, after a huge battle, the school was turned into an academy, but that's another story. Michael never stopped working to highlight and demand action over. You might have to take over.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jean's going to just.
Okay, just stay there. Michael never stopped working to highlight and demand action over these public outrages. The pressure and campaigning even led to small legislative changes. For his work, he was awarded an MBE, and no one more deserved this public honour. As Isaac Newton said, we stand on the shoulder of giants. A new heroine, Lucy Stevens, has stepped up to the plate to carry forward the campaign. Her mother, also a teacher, also had died of mesothelioma. Why should we leave it to those who have suffered personal loss to carry the standard? Isn't a fundamental of trade unionism meant to be one for all and all for one? Conclusion: what has to be done and what is to be done? Unity gives strength, and the greater the unity, the greater the strength. As most of you know, Hank joined all three main unions, ATL, NUT, and NSUWT, and with others set up a cross-union organisation to unite the education unions. The creation of the NEU is an important outcome of our collective work and has made us stronger. Through this cross-union work, he got to know Carol Hagedorn, an NASUWT member. She had mesothelioma, again contracted at school. Unions were all trying to confront the problem of asbestos in schools separately and making very little progress. The obvious thing to do was to set up a cross-union body to fight the problem. Carol and I put a motion to the NSUWT conference to set up such a body. Her speech when she told conference that she was dying from mesothelioma was extraordinarily moving. She received a standing ovation and the motion was passed. I had also arranged to put the same motion at the NUT and ATL conference. They were also passed. Thus, the Joint Union Asbestos Committee, or JUAC, was formed. It is a trade union campaigning committee comprising 8 unions: ASCL, NHT, NEU, NASUWT, UCU, Voice, plus the education sections of Unison, Unite, and the GMB. The group's objective is to make all UK schools and colleges safe from the dangers of asbestos. We are stronger together rather than separately, and we've made some good progress in a difficult situation.
Okay. As a country, we have the highest density of asbestos in buildings in the world and the highest rate of mesothelioma. It kills more people each year than road accidents. Unfortunately, Carol Hagedorn, RIP, was another one of them. To her eternal credit, she stood up and struck a blow for all. Unions are composed of workers, and we as workers have to do better. No one will do it for us. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, famously said, "There is a class war, all right, and my class is winning it. We have to reverse this. Stopping our members and our pupils being killed at school is a prime task. We have agency. What can you do? Not just with asbestos, but with any health and safety problem. Investigate, report, speak out, individually and collectively. Make use of the Freedom of Information Act while we still have one. There is nothing more powerful than a question, except a question that has to be answered." Next slide. Organise a local conference. Brent held its first one in Brent Town Hall. The second one on the left-hand side was at Wembley Conference Centre. And the third one on the right, Wembley Stadium in 2010. At that, by the way, we warned of a serious danger, indeed the inevitability of pandemic and the need for take adequate precautions. Government utterly failed to do this. We are organising our biggest conference ever this year. And this is the agreed programme. As you can see, we have lots of high profile speakers, including 3 general secretaries. It will take place on May the 5th, 2021, next year. Next slide, please. In March 2016, we prepared and launched this document about asbestos in schools in Brent and the implication of the need for action nationally. The conclusion was the findings in this report indicate that asbestos management concerns identified in Brent are actually a national problem, and therefore national action is required to ensure pupils are not exposed to asbestos in schools. For JUAC, Dr. Jill Reid has prepared another research document with proposals to go to government regarding class system-built schools. This should be available soon. Our aim from this is to consider a legal challenge based on the inadequacy of both present legislation and the actions taken about hazards, and that this breaks the Human Rights Act and its prime directive, which is the right to life. We need to seek to ensure that our unions and others back this. To conclude with the song, there will be a chance for comments or questions. Hope you enjoyed that.
Certainly did, Hank. That's absolutely brilliant. And yeah, some of those names you've mentioned, obviously I got drawn into the campaign as well quite a few years ago. So yeah, but some of the things that you described, yeah, fantastic. In terms of questions, I think everyone's been that focused on your presentation that I can't see any on the chat as yet. So there's a couple coming through now, but I've got a couple that I can throw at you that might be some use to colleagues watching. And we've got quite a lot, you'll know this already, that we've got quite a lot of new health and safety reps. So for those that are new, Hank, what actions would you recommend that a brand new or relatively new health and safety rep should take in their school with regard to asbestos? They might not even know it's there, but anyway, over to you on that.
Well, I think my answer to that was in the presentation there, and that is there's nothing as powerful as asking a question. And because obviously in health and safety, you have certain powers, and those that are in management positions are meant to be responding to those questions. And if they don't respond, they can get into trouble. Asking those questions is key. I'll give another thing to that though, that if they don't answer, you repeat it and you repeat it, you give them a bit of time and you repeat it and you repeat it and you repeat it again. All that does is put them in a much worse position for the future. That will come back to bite them if they ignore it. Once they start responding, obviously, hopefully you'll get the truth. But again, these people are inveterate liars, unfortunately. But once they start that, then obviously you can start following that up, exposing that and making progress.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I suppose linked to that question as well, and I'm working on the assumption here that we have got new people and they might not, they'll be learning about asbestos from this presentation. What about if a new rep or even an experienced rep asks for information about asbestos in their schools and they can't get hold of it, or the school doesn't seem to want to provide it? What courses of action would you recommend there?
Well, again, you line them up with at least 10 requests for it. You then start to complain to anyone who you can complain to. You can complain to the union nationally. If it gets far enough, it could get up to the level of the General Secretary writing a letter if it's important enough. I've had that happen. You also start to complain to the Health and Safety Executive, to the DFE, etc., etc. Again, they'll try and not answer it, but the longer they don't answer it for, the worse it is. And if they start to answer it in a way any way that's not true, they're headed for trouble, because you have to be a detective as well. All right, this is part of your role, I think, long term. It takes a while to learn to get it, but you develop it, and then you become a bit like an investigative journalist, and you can expose this because they are so corrupt and they are so useless.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hank. And just following that thread through, what sort of information should we be asking for? What sort of information should reps be asking for in relation to asbestos?
Well, this is straightforward ones. Obviously, exactly where it is in the school, complete details of where it is, when it was last inspected. Have they looked for? Have they done anything about hidden asbestos? Because they're meant to say where that is as well. So you can obviously get a more detailed ones, but start simple, the obvious things. Okay, you're looking. if it hasn't been inspected for years, then obviously they fail to do what they should do. And if they haven't got proper adequate reports of the state of the asbestos, they've also failed to do that. Have they got a plan for its removal? If not, why not? Long term, governing bodies should be thinking about, can they remove some of it, all of it, for the future? Because whilst it's there, it's inherently dangerous. They can say, oh, it's encapsulated, but that's not good enough, because at any stage it can be damaged by fire, flood, pupils, or whatever. Asbestos is inherently dangerous if it's in a building.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hank. There's a couple of questions coming through now. A question from Val Kane. How do we find out if there are any CLASP schools in our area, and perhaps let everybody know what a CLASP school is?
Right. A CLASP school is basically what they call a system built one. That means it's like a prefab, and the prefabricated pieces have built-in asbestos to them. Okay, so that means it can easily escape if there's any cracks in it, damage to it, and what have you. So it's a very, almost a jerry built type system intrinsically. So the local authority should have a list of those type of buildings. Jill Reed, Dr. Jill Reed, is somebody who's doing extensive research into this, and obviously through you or me or anybody else, you can give them Jill's email, and she can tell where the CLASP schools are in that area. We are concentrating on taking action over those because they are the worst, and they're the ones that we think we should be able to get involved in this court case.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hank. Jill's done extensive work on that particular area. Okay, and I'm looking at another screen now because people are sharing these questions with me. A request, if you could just say something, and I know you shared one of your slides about the event that's that's planned for the next May at Wembley, which may or may not have to be moved forward. Can you say something, perhaps a bit more about that? Because that's not just asbestos, is it, Hank? So maybe just say a bit more about what that covers.
No, it's not just about asbestos. What we decided to do, we discussed it on DUAC, and we thought that there's an essential unity really with airborne killers. Asbestos is one of them, but there's lots of other airborne killers, and indeed climate change basically is an airborne killer, pumping in a gas that is dangerous. So we're covering all invisible killers, what can and must be done. And we've got Lucy Stevens speaking about asbestos, Rosamund Kizzy Deborah speaking about traffic pollution, Dr. Fuller speaking about rising global threat of air pollution. He's written a book, Gary Fuller. The three general secretaries, we've got Jenny Cooper speaking to it, Hilda Palmer, she's spoken at one of our things, Professor Andrew Watterson, who's a lecturer, been doing stuff on coronavirus, and Dr. John Lister, who's London Health Emergency writer and academic. Awesome. And so there's a really packed program. If it won't be brought forward, it'll be put back. If we can't have it because the government stops it, it will take place the following year at no extra cost. So we're going ahead now as if it's definitely going to occur, and if it's not allowed to, we will do it the following year at the same time. And we're going to do it both ways. We're going to do it when you're there, a physical one, and we're going to do a virtual conference at the same time. So we're looking at having a very wide coverage of this, and you should be getting all the stuff out before long to tell you the exact details and booking details, etc., etc.
Okay, thanks. It sounds exciting, and hopefully that it will take place at some point. But that does sound exciting. A major event to raise awareness. Another question that's come in asking, what do you think about the importance of getting parents on board in local campaigns or even wider campaigns than that because of the particular risks to children?
Well, this is really important, and it's an area that we have found difficult. I don't understand exactly why, because to me, as a parent, you should be right concerned with asbestos and your pupil being potentially killed by mesothelioma from it existing in the building. So we have more work to do on this. It is important and crucial. On certain occasions, the parents have come forward and been a powerful force, but they haven't been, in my view, done it as much as I would like that to. I know that in some other countries, in Spain, for example, they have had a very successful campaign involving parents. So we can do it, but it's something that it needs to be addressed more. It's obviously something that you should do. Of course, what they try and say, this is just panicking the parents. Well, so they should panic. Sorry, if there's a killer on the loose inside the school, you know, if there was a leopard in there or something, you'd worry about it, wouldn't you? I mean, you know, the arguments are ludicrous for not telling parents. So in the United States, they need to be informed by law, and that's what should happen here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. I think some of us are experiencing issues around data being shared with COVID as well as asbestos. But yeah, it's something that we need to keep pushing with. Another prompt here around when would it be appropriate to involve the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, as I guess as a safety rep or even an officer? What could you say about that?
Well, the key thing is to build up a list of emails that you've sent that have not been responded to, and then obviously you can try other routes. You can try your area a health and safety person. You can try the executive or the general secretary even, and what have you. You can try the DFE, and what do you just escalate. In the end, what you're doing is complaining to anybody and everybody. When my head teacher nicked that money from my school, 2.7 million, I started off complaining at a low level, and in the end, I was copying it to everybody and their dog, every national newspaper, every TV programs and what have you, and they were doing their best to ignore it. But in the end, they couldn't.
No. Well, you chipped away on that one pretty well. So yeah, that's a good success to refer to. I'm just looking on my screen here. What would be Hank's answer to an employer saying there's no problem, the asbestos is encased, and best to leave it rather than remove it?
I'd like to be able to say to have a bag of asbestos. Open it up in front of them and say, have a couple of quick gulps of air from this bag, will you? And see whether you think there might be a problem. Of course, if they say it's because it's white asbestos, and that's not dangerous, that's a lie. Okay, it's less dangerous than the other two, but it's still single fiber, can kill. If they say it's encapsulated, it can still be damaged by the way I said, fire, flood, vandalism, etc. Asbestos is always a danger. It is not no problem. It has killed millions. Okay, it has killed millions, and it's actually killed that number. I think maybe not quite a million, but in a huge number of people it has killed in Britain. Never mind anywhere else. It kills more than, as I said, more than traffic accidents.
Yeah, and we don't know the precise number. It's likely to be a lot more than what we're told about, isn't it, Hank? So it's really scary in that way. Another good question, and this is about the expertise of school leaders or not, and an issue about duty holders. So would we expect school leaders to have more training from their employers? Who should be taking responsibility for it on the ground, perhaps in those local areas and schools?
Well, there should obviously be a school duty holder. A lot of the time it will be the head teacher, but it doesn't have to be the head teacher. Should they have training? Yes. Do they always have training? No. So you can ask, obviously, have they got training? And the next thing, if it does come back and say no, well, how can they do their job then? Why can't you put them on training? You talking about, if you know, about a duty holder in the school. There's also obviously the local authority. If it's a local authority school, they have a vicarious liability in the area of health and safety. What does that mean? They can't just pass the health and safety problems down to school level. They have a responsibility to make sure that health and safety issues like asbestos are being properly dealt with in the school. So you can complain if it's an LA school and nothing's going on to the local authority and ask what they have to say about it. Once you get them in writing, then you can normally make use of that to go to the next level.
Yeah, and a follow up from that. What should a school have? What should there be there legally? And there are legal requirements. What can you say briefly about what should exist in every school in relation to asbestos?
Well, they should have a documentation, obviously, yeah, asbestos register, where all the asbestos in the school is indicated, where it is, in what condition it is, when it was last inspected, any planned proposals for removal, blah, 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 checking it there, whether it's included, obviously, whether any hidden asbestos. A lot of them haven't done that. So that's what you do, you ask to see it. In fact, you can take a copy of it.
Anyone who's coming into any work,
anyone to coming into the school, it needs to be available for them to come into the electrical work or anything else. That should be able to be referred to in case they do any work that disturbs asbestos because they didn't know where it was.
Yeah, and we know that that's a classic problem and is something that doesn't happen quite a lot, and many exposures occur as a result of that. Right, a couple more before we finish. I think we're probably coming close to the end of this session. One from Ken Smith here. Says the HSE have said that properly managed asbestos presents a very low risk to people in school buildings. What are your thoughts on such a statement?
Am I allowed to say bollocks?
Absolutely.
Well, I've said it too late. Listen,
it's money.
It's all this is about is money. Okay, it was about money as to why it was put in when they knew it was dangerous. It's about money now where they won't remove it even though they know it's dangerous. It is always potentially dangerous. Even if it's been encapsulated yesterday, it's potentially dangerous because it can be damaged. Okay, so this is the problem, is obviously to deal with all of this is a question of billions being spent, and and the problem lies with Parliament. But we have to try and make progress, and we are going to make progress both on the ground. Obviously, by challenging it on the ground, you can get progress in your own school sometimes to get some changes made to it and done. But also by trying a legal move to try and make them, you know, the Human Rights Act, to see if we can get some more pressure on them. But it is never, ever safe. It's like there's a deadly poison in your school, in a whatever it is, okay? Is that a potential problem? Yes, even if it's locked in a blinking safe. The school burnt up and there was an explosion or something that could be spread all around it. It's a killer, and therefore it is always potentially dangerous.
Thanks, Hank. And it's invisible and we can't see it. Yeah. All right. Well, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your presentation and for the answers to the questions that you've given. If there are a couple of things that you could, a couple of tasks, it's that awful thing, isn't it? Some tasks for people to take away with, or things that they could get involved with. What would you say? A couple of things for people to take away with that they could perhaps do tomorrow, next week, next month. What could you recommend?
Well, I think the right mentality is all. The right attitude is all. To stand up for yourself is worrying, especially when you. I can remember being frightened in my first term at school, being called into the head teacher's office as a new union rep. Okay, you have to face that. You have to should face it. You carry on. You get better. You get stronger, and you start to get. We need to stand up. You know, that last bit of the song, "Stand up for your rights," is absolutely the crucial thing. That is the key thing. Once you do that, well, you can write your first letter asking a question. That'll start you off, but get your mind right. We have to change our society completely. It is a disgrace, and we have to build a new and better one, and everybody should be a part of that.
Thanks very much, Hank. Once again, thanks for this afternoon, and thanks to Jean as well, helping out.